Hello everybody, Joe Keller, Fox Waterway Agency, standing next to your Great Fox River. We're right near the state line, and from the state line all the way to Algonquin, including the 15 major chain of lakes, that covers a span of our jurisdiction, which is huge and which is fun. Right down 16 miles downriver from us is the Stratton Lock and Dam. It was created in 1939 for your benefit so we could have recreational boating and enjoyment of this waterway for many years to come. It's been proved upon a lot since then, but it's certainly a particular system. What does that mean? That dam, by the way, is not a flood dam. It doesn't necessarily have any qualities to control flooding on the system. A little bit, but not a whole lot. So when it rains on your system, and in the 1,000 square miles of waterway north of us, every drop of rain that falls there comes through this Fox River. And when we get a lot of it, like we had the last 30 days, roughly 10 to 15 inches, that's a lot of rain, folks, that has to go from that's 1,000 square miles all the way through this river, through your chain, and out Algonquin. To give you an idea, the span and the depth of the river in terms of drop from the state line all the way to Algonquin is the thinnest drop over the 465 feet of drop from Waukesha County all the way to Algonquin. It's the slightest drop there is. So when it rains on 1,000 square miles of waterway, for every inch on 1 square mile, that equates to over 17.4 million gallons of water, which is roughly the weight of 11,000 elephants. So imagine that times 1,000, you're talking over 17 trillion gallons of water that has to flow through this system. That's significant. So the folks at the IDNR work really hard to move the water out as quick as possible. But as I mentioned, that dam is not really geared towards flood or high water events, but they do their best to regulate it and get it out of the system as quickly as possible. That's why you see no wakes and sometimes closures on the lower, sometimes on the upper and the lakes as well. Right now, the weather looks great, the sun is shining, and all is good, so let's move that water out of this system as quickly as possible. The last few years have shown that with climate change, call it what you want, there's a lot of effects of that. We've seen greater amounts of intensity rains through smaller periods. We have more development in and around the system, not to mention folks that try to get water to the system after a rainfall quicker than they have in the past due to the development and other actions. Plus, we have detention and retention ponds that have been filling up. So there's a lot of challenges that we're faced with the Fox Water Agency, but with your help and your care, we're gonna get it all figured out and make it better each day with your assistance. We appreciate your support. As time goes by, we're going to give you some more information on our socials and education in terms of what the water levels and the rains do to our system and how it affects you as a boater. And here's Pat and Rob with the advisory committee who are going to give you some more additional great information.
Wonder how the water levels are controlled? Well, they are controlled by the Office of Water Resources, which is part of the IDNR, and they manage the Stratton and Algonquin dams. The dams are operated with really 4 goals in mind. They're trying to maintain the resource at a level that is neither too high nor too low. They want to minimize regional flooding. They want to maintain the outflow for the communities that are south of us who depend upon the Fox River for their water supplies. And it's important to recognize that they can only manage those water levels to the best of their abilities until Mother Nature gets involved. And when too much water gets dumped on the region, it obviously affects our water levels overall. When they exceed those guidelines, they have very specific things that they do at the 2 dams to try to relieve the pressure of the water and move it through the system. And there are very specific operating guidelines that they use, and you can find them at the DNR website, and we will have the link available to you.
Pat's already shared a little bit of information about how the Illinois Department of Natural Resources, Office of Water Management, Office of Water Resources manages the water levels in the chain. The truth is it's a very complicated thing, but there are some things that we can look at to see how the system is operating. It's a very tricky balance. So when you can't let the water out too fast, or you're going to end up with high water down on the lower river, and you can't let it out too slow, or you're going to end up with high water on the lake. So now, how do you see what's happening in the system? The United States Geological Survey Service has gauges around the system, and those gauges you can use to look at what's happening on the system. The one gauge that's available to us is the one at the New Minster, and that gauge helps us tell us what's coming in. That normal gauge height is about 6, and between 6 and 10 we'll see water rising in the lakes. When we get an extreme situation above 10, it's likely that the lake will go no wake. Another gauge that really helps us see what's happening is what's happening at the dam, and that's called the tailway gauge. And that gauge is normally at about 1.5 feet. When it reaches 3 feet, that's when you're going to have no wake or the closed river down below. So if you're interested in seeing what's happening on the chain, you can always check out the gauges on the U.S. Geological Services.
All right, Rob and I are here to talk about what is summer pool and what is winter pool. So I'm going to take summer pool because that's the fun time. And summer pool is when we keep the lakes at a level of a minimum of 4.2. And that measurement is done at the gauge in Lake Villa. It's called the Fox Lake gauge, and you can find it and see where we are relative to summer pool. And then come October, winter pool comes, and that's Rob.
Yeah, so winter pool starts at the beginning of November, and that's when they start to lower the water level, and they use the whole month of November to lower the water level. And the gauge height during the winter will be 3 or 2.5 at the Fox Lake Villa gauge. Now, what is actually happening? What does that do for us? That allows for the summer or the spring surge that we can get from winter melt and from spring rains. And that, by lowering the level, we can then have spring melt or accommodate for 5 billion gallons of water coming in the spring. And even this year, we had one instance where we actually drove the water up to 5 at the Lake Villa gauge. If we hadn't have done a winter drawdown, we would have had severe flooding in the chain. So winter pool really helps us prevent that flooding in the earliest part of the season.
And the other thing about winter pool to remember, because our water levels are so much lower, it's an opportunity to go along our shorelines and remove any junk that you can find. There's junk out there all year long, and we want to encourage everyone to keep removing it.
So here we are at a gauge site. This gauge site, you can see it's the USGS gauge site, and this is the gauge site for the Fox Lake on Lake Villa. And what I encourage you to do is check out the web pages, and when you go to the web page for each of the gauges, what you'll find is a graph. On the horizontal axis will be date and time, and on the vertical axis will be feet. This gauge and every gauge is set at a specific height or above sea level, and then the gauge number on the side is how much further above the sea level you are for that gauge. Typically at this gauge, the summer pool number is 4.2, the winter pool number is 2.5, and then if we get into a stake where we're no wake, the number would be 5.0 or 5 feet even. So check out the web pages or the gauges, and you can learn a lot about the chain of lakes.
Thanks so much for watching these videos. We hope that we gave you some valuable insight into how the chain is managed and where the gauge heights are and how they work. If you need additional information on gauge heights, please go to the Waterway's webpage. We'll continue to deliver educational videos, and if there's a topic you want us to cover, please put it in the comments. Thanks again.